hear me?
Yes, it's visible and you're audible.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll start with the talk then. So like you said, my name is Pranjal. I am from the HS12 batch from the IIT Madras Humanities and Social Sciences Department, and currently working in a NGO which works in Maharashtra. So uh, we've been conducting the organization has been conducting some research in the field of education as an organization, and I am presenting the findings that we had from that research. So the topic of this research was learning loss in ashram schools in Nashik. I'm going to just give you a brief background of what ashram schools are. So across India and in Maharashtra, there are these residential schools for tribal children, most scheduled tribes. And these are located especially in the regions where the tribal population is very high, about 7% or higher. And children from around the villages that come to that school to stay for over the period of, say, throughout the academic year, and then they go back once in a while the academic year is going on. So these are residential schools for tribal children, and that is the program. So there are about 500 such government run ashram schools in Maharashtra, and 500 schools that have been aided by the government but run by other small institutions. So one of our programs focuses on the work done in ashram schools. Before actually can go ahead, I would prefer it if we have questions while I am talking, or do we need to have that only afterwards? Uh, what's the, like you say, I know you said that uh, there are no questions at the end, but it's easier if I can have like a conversation and people can ask me questions because it is online. Is that doable? Or
Yes, that can be done.
yeah, so at any point, anybody has questions, please do raise your hand and we can have a actual conversation, because some of these things might not be very, it's a very narrow context that I am talking about, and it's better to have clarifications whenever they are necessary. All right. So Nashik is a district in Maharashtra with a tribal population, and there are some 50 ashram schools in that district, and we have a program for the children in about 18 such ashram schools. All right, so I'll go ahead. So the program has been, what do you call, supported by NSE Foundation, National Stock Exchange Foundation, and the tribal department in Maharashtra. And we are the ones who sort of do the training of teachers and the monitoring and evaluation of the program. So we'll go ahead and talk about the program itself now. Okay, so the program is called Anupad that we run. So I am giving you this context because the research is based on this particular program. So the program is a level-based learning approach. So even before the pandemic, uh, people have sort of realized the need that children who come in ashram schools, who come from grade 5 to 8, have not achieved the kind of literacy and numeracy expectations for their grade. Especially in terms of language and mathematics, they fall behind the grade necessary achievements. And so this problem has been persistent for quite a few years across India and in Maharashtra. So this program was created to sort of address that problem. The approach is such that, okay, we'll assess children's, and we'll assess what their needs, current needs are, what their current learning needs are, and we'll provide input according to those needs, so that slowly we can get them to grade appropriate learning. So that is the basic idea of a level-based learning approach. I don't know if you've sort of read about this, but the Pratham and their organizations also do this something similar with Teach at the Right Level, TAR, which is a very similar idea. So that is the programs. So we have a assessment kit for language and mathematics, which is fairly comprehensive and which basically looks at children's learnings about till grade 5. So we assume that, okay, at least till grade 5 you need to have your competencies properly covered. So, and that test is administered for children from grade 5 to 8 generally. And throughout the program, we hope that children can at least come to about 50% of the competencies in grade 5. Wherever we have tried to do, wherever we have done this program, children always, like about 80 to 90% of the children fall below about 40% or 25% sometimes of the tests for especially for language. And that is what happened in Nashik as well. And that's a 3-year long program where we train teachers to teach to conduct language and mathematics related activities, primarily focused on so literacy and numeracy components. And the teachers conduct this program over a period of say 3 years, and each one of the batches goes one by one, so 6 7 8 or 5 6 7. uh, and then we provide regular on-site support to the teachers through our coordinators so that they can address whatever little problems that they are having while conducting the classes in the school. This is like a, so we take about 45 minutes for math and 45 minutes for language during the school period. So during the school time that they have, we take 45 minutes for language and 45 minutes for math for all the groups that have formed based on the assessment. Are there any questions about this? Are there any clarifications that are needed? Otherwise, I can go ahead. Okay, I'll go ahead. So that is the Anupad program. In the Nashik district, we are conducting this program with about 18 ashram schools, which has until now has an impact about 4,000 children. And in 2020, about 1,400 students had completed 2 years of the input. So February 2020, we had this program running for at least 3 years, and we had completed 1,400 children had completed 2 years of input. Now, this was where and then in March 2020, as you know, the lockdown was initiated. So we had like endline assessment of 1,400 children. Uh, we had the data of where children were just before the lockdown hit. And once the lockdown sort of hit, we realized that this sort of data would be very crucial to understand what the effects of the lockdown were. So this is where the idea of our research project actually started. We realized we have this sort of opportunity, though I wouldn't want to call it one, but we had the opportunity to actually understand what happens when such long-term school closures are initiated, especially for children whose only exposure to schooling or only exposure to the world of learning and reading and writing is through schools. So, and the most of the students in this cohort of 1,400 had sort of reached to the level that we wanted them through the program. Okay, I'll just go ahead. Yeah, so here is the basic data for the children after 3 years of intervention. So what we say is that in either in language or in mathematics, you should reach about 50% scores on the test. If you reach about 50%, we say that okay, you can cope with the grade appropriate curriculum that you will be asked to do in say 7th or 8th or 6th or 7th. So that is the idea. And as you can see, most children, but we had a mean of 47. We had an average of 47 in language and 42 in mathematics by in February 2020. So children had reached to this stage after 3 years, after the 2 years of intervention in language and mathematics. Are there any questions about this? Okay, I'll go ahead. So, so the first when the in March 2020 the first lockdown hit, and so we were with everything that shifted to online mode. We were thinking this idea of this research project was in incubation while we conducted other programs as much as we could. So as an NGO, we have commitments to our funders, we have commitments to our beneficiaries to continue the programs in whatever manner that we can, when even in most extreme circumstances, which is what we tried to do when the first lockdown hit. We focused on teacher education. We focused on, because the children that we work with don't really have a lot of access to internet connectivity. These children are from extremely remote villages, Most of their parents are migratory laborers, migrant workers who move around with their children often, or even if they do, they have their own fields. There's absolutely no internet connectivity for them. So we focused on teachers because they do have cell phones, and they have, most of them live in towns or cities, and they have internet connectivity, so we could work with them. So we worked on upskilling teachers during the period of lockdown, and that was our main focus during the lockdown. So, I'll go ahead. Huh. So, like I said, in March 2020, when the lockdown hit, and the March sort of continued, and schools remained closed, and even they've been open only a few times in between, and now they are opening again. So it was almost like in January 2021, it was almost a year when we the that the schools had been closed. February 2020 May was our end line for the cohort, and then lockdowns happened, and then almost a year passed, academic year passed, and children were still not in schools. So we decided, okay, what we are going to do is we are going to assess our children using the same similar tool that we had used in our end line. We make parallel tools. So I'll talk a little bit about the tool at this in a later slide, what the tool actually entails, especially the language tool. But so we basically use those tests again with the children, and we conducted tests and sort of under looking at the difference between where children's levels after lockdown and children's level before lockdown. We could calculate the loss that children had incurred due to school closure. Huh. And so, what is the importance here is that in India and in Maharashtra, we don't really have this sort of data. There are a few researches that have been conducted. Say, for example, Azim Premji University has conducted a similar research. There are a few others that are now coming in. And some of them do focus on urban children, and some of them focus on rural. But when we look at children from tribal areas, we really do not have this sort of data. And without some good data, we don't really know what the situation is. We don't really know what solutions can be created, why, and what solutions will work, what solutions won't work. All of those questions will remain unanswered. All will be answered on the basis of assumptions that are not cross-checked. So, and looking at all of this, we thought that okay, this sort of data would be very, very important for policy level decision. So, which is why we started looking at the. So, doing this research was not actually a part of the project itself, but we conducted the research with all of these ideas in mind. So, I'll go ahead. So, like I said, there were 1,400 children. Those 1,400 children were from around like 500 villages. So there were 18 ashram schools, about 1,400 children, and those children were from over 500 different villages. So looking at this geographical spread, it was impossible to go to every village. So we did random selection of the villages. We selected about 60 villages originally randomly, and out of them we then selected 37 based on some sort of ease of access through at least uh, cars and other vehicles, because most of our tests, like you can see, are conducted using tablets, because that it gives ease to data collection, error checking, and all of that. So it was total 25 days of data collection that happened with about 6 people. Some of them were paper-based tests, because there's a part in the language test, there is a part where children have to write a story, children have to write an opinion, children have to write a letter. So those sort of things they have to do on paper, and they have to put together in for each child. And then there were field visits for qualitative observation. There were what do you call, one-on-one interviews with some of the children, talking about what they've gone through, what they felt, what their problems were during the period of the lockdown. And so that was the sampling and data collection ka process. Again, any questions until this, because we've covered a lot of ground here. Uh, it'll be very, very good if there are some clarifications that I can offer so that we can go ahead. I'll wait for a minute. Okay. So all right. If there are no questions, I can move on. So this is the data collection. This was the process for data collection. We'll go ahead. These are the findings that we uh, had. Now, this is for mathematics. So in the left, you can see that February 19, February 20, and January 21. And the mathematics, what do you call? The backslide was about 11.7%. And in language, it was about 27% of percent backslide. And so we realized that this is the language backslide is really high. The children had achieved some amount of competence in language, and then they suddenly slid back to about 25%, 27% in a year because of no input. So we decided to look at this particular point of data further. Now, in the language test, there are a lot of sections. First section is basically about decoding encoding in the sense that children are, so language is Marathi. That is the language that children have to learn. Very often children's home language is very different. So children from hill and what do you call it? Mahadevpuri and other communities, tribal communities come to these schools. So their home language is very different from Marathi, but they're supposed to be learning Marathi when they come to the school. So that is the language that we teach, and that is the language that we work with. In Marathi, there are a few problems specific to the Marathi Devanagari script, in the sense that the code for Marathi Devanagari script is very, very large. There are about six if you count the actual number of what do you call graphemes, or the number of uh, letters or alphabets, the unique letters and alphabets the children have to sort of memorize before they can. So it can go above 100, it can go up to 200. So that is why a lot of children have problem in sort of learning this new script. And we have devised a method in which we break down this script into smaller chunks and make meaningful texts from each chunk, so that children find it easier to learn to read. So this is again the basis theory, pedagogical theory that we apply on field, which nowadays is also being used in after NEP and FLN. So National Education Policy 2020 sort of has this sort of idea embedded in it. The foundational literacy and numeracy mission that the nation has sort of declared also has this idea कि reading should be about meaning making. Reading should not be about only about letter identification or about letter calling. कि I'll give you a letter and it will just name that letter. I don't know if any of you here might have gone through that sort of regimen of learning to read, but even now in schools, the regimen for learning is rote memorization of alphabets first, then rote memorization of say small words, then rote memorization of sentences. Nowhere in the process does meaning come into play. And the primary goal for any reading is meaning making, to sort of have an emotional connect with the text, to gain information from the text, to reflect on the text, to use the text in everyday work. So we consider all of these sort of facets of what reading means, and we apply them in our day-to-day learning activities with children. And that is why also we see a lot of difference in the way children learn. So, like I was saying, throughout all of this, children had gained some significant, children had achieved some significant gains after a year of input, but then they had also lost some, especially in language. So then we sort of dug in to what happened exactly in language. Now, like I was saying, in language, there is decoding and encoding, there is vocabulary and grammar, which are two small parts. Then there is reading comprehension, which is a large chunk of our text. And there is a writing component, which is also a fairly large chunk of our text. Now, what happens in writing is not many children had achieved a very high degree of proficiency in writing to begin with. So we didn't see much of a backslide. But in reading comprehension, the children had achieved a very high degree of competency. So, and then we had the reading comprehension we had sort of divided into two smaller units for our ease of understanding. One is simple reading comprehension, the other is complex reading comprehension. And I will show to you what the two are just for the sake of reference. So this is what we meant by simple reading comprehension. Now this is the text is in Marathi. It talks about a farmer who's what do you call in his field is putting some other sort of seeds after the normal crop because the last year's crop did not come well, and it was not well because the rains were very what do you call the rains were not good, and all of this information is given in the text. Now the question that is asked from this test is why was the yield low from the Ramesh's farm last year. Now, this sort of question is called explicit question. The information is provided in the text, and the child is supposed to just read the text, understand it, and answer that sort of question. This is simple reading comprehension with a explicit question. Now, this is a complex reading comprehension task that children have to do, where we give them a fairly what do you call it's a medium-sized sort of news report that they have to read, and the questions. So this report is about a school. There is a what do you call hand pump in front of a school which is not functional, and a newspaper writes an article about that about the hand pump not being functional, and authorities sort of take action and what do you call repair the new hand pump, and then the same newspaper reports the say about that news. So that is the gist of this news piece, and within the text there is a reference that a lot of parents and teachers were worried that children had to go to this other well to get water, and everybody was concerned about their safety, which implied that children had to cross a fairly what do you call big road, fairly heavy traffic road to go to that well to get water. So, and that was implied, it is not given in the text. And children had to read the whole text to sort of come to understand this inference, and then they could answer this question. So these are the two major types of tasks that children were supposed to be doing in the test. And like I showed last in the slide, it is complex reading comprehension that suffered the most. Simple reading comprehension had suffered an 18% black slide, but there was 50% mean even in January 21. But complex reading comprehension had a very big dip, and and there are very good reasons for this. And like I said, because the children who come to these schools do not come from literate homes. Their homes are not, their parents are sometimes only barely literate. By grade 2 or 3 they have completed, grade 6 they have completed maybe. There is absolutely no reading material available in their homes, and also most of their time is spent working with their parents in the fields or in other areas. So there's very little chance that they could be able to read. Now, why is this important? Why is this sort of task important? You look at the kind of things that we have to do in our PG, we have to do in our master's courses, or even in our bachelor courses for that matter. A lot of it depends on reading comprehension. Even if we don't go to the level of university, most of our schooling is based on reading something that is given to us, making sense of it, and then either recreating what is given in the text or making inferences from that text, or sort of processing the information provided in the text in a different way. That is most of our learning needs right now. So if children do not achieve that sort of competency, they have a lot of they face a lot of issues in the future when they go to 11 12th, when they go to further degree, and because of the focus on rote memorization, they don't really gain the competence to comprehend text, process text, or work with sort of a long passage. So that is what the aim for reading comprehension has always been in our program, and we realize that that is what has been suffering the most for children. Um, so, so then along with that, we also had some field visits during the testing. So basically, I was the one who went to one or two villages to stay there for a few days. and we spoke to the children, we spoke to the parents, we spoke to one of the few teachers there in the, and to sort of observe what was going on, what was their daily schedule like. And children were pretty good, like children were happy, children were going around doing their own things, but most of their time was spent performing household chores, especially for girls. And once the and the older children, especially 8 onwards, grade 8 onwards, had started working with their parents. They start gone to other people's fields to start working and getting paid on on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. And we knew that once that starts happening, getting them back to school is a big challenge, because once they sort of have an grasp of key finances in their hands, they don't want to come back to school, because school is not very welcoming to them. It's a very, very different culture from where they live in. So we had these observations that, and that was also where we had this observation that children do not have exposure to reading material at all. The internet connectivity or mobile network was extremely poor. Uh, it was barely possible to make a few calls from one or those few of those villages. Most of them are completely cut off from the world once the what do you call actual people going in and out is stopped. They would cut off from the world outside. They had no idea what was going on, or people who live there just get isolated on their own. So, and obviously, the children had not received any classes or any teaching input during that time. So, so this was what we had observed also on based on our field visit. All right. So, are there any questions or clarifications at this point, or should I go ahead? All right, I'll go ahead. I don't mind. Huh. So, like I said, okay, so there was no reading material except the textbooks in the school, and we spoke to the parents, and as you can obviously guess, the parents were like, we want our children to go back to school because that is the only place where they have any sort of input for so that they can sort of move out of the labor situation that we are in. And they looked at school as the only avenue for, say, social mobility, for any form of change in occupation and all of that. Uh, and so they were very open and vocal about it. School should begin as soon as possible. It is only a few months now, a few months back, that most of the schools have now started opening, especially the tribal ashram schools. And the reason behind that is that these schools are residential, so they are extremely high risk schools to open for the government. And a lot of these schools had been converted into COVID centers for patients in and around that area, because there are residential facilities available. The the what do you call location is such that it is isolated. The grounds are slightly pretty big. So considering all of that, a lot of these residential schools were converted into COVID centers. Even all of those reasons sort of mounted up into the residential schools opening last every time the government decided to even open a little bit. All right. So, like we said, uh, in this, we saw a complex reading comprehension 43% backslide, and in language overall it is 27% backslide. So based on this, we made a calculation how much time would we need to sort of fill this gap. uh, what input would we need to provide, so which might be able to fill this gap. And we came to a conclusion that we need about 11 weeks or 10 weeks of plan, uh, teaching plan, so that children can recover this backslide. And this was a calculation based on how much children had achieved in 1 years of input last time. And now and we need to sort of fill that gap within a time period. So 30 weeks of schooling time came down to about 22 weeks of actual instruction time lost. And because we were saying that, okay, we are trying to teach children something again, they already know most of the things that we're going to teach them. So we sort of halved the input time from 22 to 11 weeks. So we created an 11 weeks plan for children. 11 weeks 11 weeks input on comprehension of different genres. genres of text like dialogue, narrative, advertisement, news report, and information or expository passages for about 200 children. And this time we had assumed that okay, now the schools are opening up a little bit. We'll be able to go at least, if not in the schools, we'll be able to go in the villages. If the schools have not opened, we'll go into the villages where there is the largest number of children, and we'll work with them there. But what happened after that was there's the second wave came in, another lockdown was initiated, and we had to try to shift everything to an online mode. In what happened when we shifted to the online mode was that most children did not have access to phones. So from our original sample of 200 children, where we were working out this new plan strategy to mitigate the loss, uh, we could reach about 60 children. So that was the first uh, gap that was there. The digital divide that we talk about is very, very obvious and apparent when we start looking at the numbers. If from 200, we directly jumped down to 60. And so we did that 11. So out of the 11 units, we managed to finish about 7 units of teaching plan with the children uh, through an online mode. The online mode was that we used WhatsApp as an interface, and we built a LMS, learning management system, which has a course in which we can create a course for children, which will include, say, some of the audio input, the audio reading samples, then some assignments, some other reading material for children. And the child can access that sort of content through WhatsApp. And once in a while, the teacher will be able to call the child at home, or that through the teacher will be able to have some contact with the child to ask them how they're doing, what their problems are, whether they need any help. And so it was basically that sort of a model that we could work out with. So it's a WhatsApp interface that we have built, under which there is a learning management system, which sort of delivers the 11-unit plan to children. So then what happened is okay, we finished the at least 7 weeks of input, and so we started, like I said, we started with face-to-face only instruction. We finished about 1 unit, and then the lockdowns happened, and we have to shift online. What we found that even with the most amount of efforts that you can put in, with 2 or 3 coordinators working for, like, trying to call every child every week, we're trying to keep contact with the child to sort of okay, submit your assignments, ask help if you want any help, uh, forwarding them the new assignments, giving support to teachers. Even with all of that, there wasn't any great improvement in children's learning through the online mode. Uh, and the face-to-face only was like only 2 week, 1 week or 2 weeks of input that we managed to finish. So even that wasn't very successful. So and all of these are statistically significant numbers. Like the p-value is less than 0.05, but the amount of increase that children have shown through the online mode is fairly low. And there are obvious reasons for this. First is, of course, because children themselves have trouble with reading comprehension. So you giving them reading tasks that they have to read and understand and then solve, it's not going to happen. And these are older kids who had already had input from our programs, children who had sort of some amount of network connectivity, they had phones in their homes. So despite all the possible factors being toward favorable, we did not really see any improvement in the online mode. And that was one thing that we wanted to sort of cross check. Does this actually work? Does online education work for children, especially children from underserved communities like tribal children from tribal areas? So, and at least from this study, we would conclude that it doesn't really work for a lot of different challenges that come into play in terms of access, infrastructure, basic. Uh, I'll give you an example in the sense that even if the children do have phones, this is from a different program which is work for preschools, that we work with preschools, where we work with the parents who have cell phones, then we give them activities to do with children. And so the parents had phones, we said sending them activities, and we realized that there was no what do you call, feedback. We're not receiving anything from some of the parents. So we went to that village, and then they realized ki, okay, the phone is with the father, and the father is like, no, I don't give my phone to my wife. It's just not happen, doesn't happen. So then we had to put a, what do you call, gram sabha, and talk about, okay, why is this important, why your wives and why the mothers should have these phones, so that they can at least conduct some of the activities with their younger children. Otherwise your younger children won't be able to learn and catch up with the other children. We have to do sort of convincing to all of the community, and then some of the fathers would be, okay, fine, we'll give at least, we'll give our phones to our wives at least during that period of time. So it's not just infrastructure either. There is a lot of social factors that are involved in the technology being implemented at the grassroots. So all of these factors are often unaccounted for, often not considered, and we, most of these factors we are not even aware of. So uh, how much are we really going to bank on online education is a question that we really need to take a hard look at. That was one of the things that looked, yeah. So challenges, like I said, issues of access to devices. Uh, Now the online mode, what happens is we can't do Zoom sessions, or we can't do online meetings with children who have barely some connectivity. Like some of the parents in these schools would say, they call us and say, okay, tomorrow, today I'll go to that particular location in my village where there is geo connectivity, and then I will download whatever material that you're sending. I will go back home and I will ask the child to do his work, and then I will come back to that field spot in that field and upload it. Parents have done this sort of thing also. So connectivity doesn't mean seamless connectivity. uh, and because of all of these problems, the the input time, so if you say that, okay, this amount of content should be covered in a week, it takes 3 weeks. So the time, input time gets prolonged, and then therefore the quality of the content also sort of gets diluted more and more. uh, Teacher child interaction is extremely important in education. I'm sure we are all aware of this key, how much, how important it is for us that our teachers are there in front of us. They talk to us, they sort of help us, guide us, support us, mentor us. When you talk about online, all of that really sort of goes away unless you are doing video session, online meetings and all of that, which is not currently possible considering infrastructure with the children that we work with. So there is that one very major gap. The other, like I said, is issues to access to devices, and taking follow-up is because of the network connectivity issues, because of the devices issues. Following up with children, okay, did you finish your assignment? What happened? Do you face any problems? Do you want any help? All of those follow-up things become extremely prolonged. These are some of the challenges that we really had while conducting uh, our pilot for the mitigation effort. So based on all of this, we created some recommendations for the government, for other organizations who are trying to work in areas like this across, either across Maharashtra or across the nation. Key First is give priority to direct face-to-face instruction. So one thing was while the online while lockdowns were initiated, a lot of organizations continued working at the level of communities. They set up community centers. That model seems to have some sort of effect, but again, it is extremely resource intensive. And what it does is again creates a what do you call, parallel system to the schools, which is not something that we would want, because the schooling system is there. We have to utilize it to make sure that education happens. The second thing is obviously that you cannot have a one size fits all policy for reopening of schools. What may work in urban areas in Bombay or urban areas in Pune will not work in the tribal belts in, say, Gadchiroli. It just won't work. So it has to be decentralized. The CEOs on each district will have to sort of look at what the situation is and open schools. For example, we can open schools that are two schools that are run by two teachers. They have a what do you call, rooster of less than 100 children. These schools can open. You don't have to wait for the what do you call, the entire state to open those schools. Uh, Now the other thing is the So a lot of children who come to the tribal schools, there are Zilla Parishad schools in their villages, but they come to these residential schools because of the services that the ashram schools provide, such as food and a place to stay when their parents are migrating. But in case of lockdowns, these children can go to Zilla Parishad schools and study there. So as long and that can only happen if there is some collaboration between the tribal development department, education department, and other departments to sort of make sure that children's education continues. Consider tech-based solutions as emergency response is again something that we found out through our pilot. Tech-based solutions are not what we think they are. They are extremely important and they are something that we really need to work on. But considering our infrastructure, considering the gaps in our infrastructure, they are not a alternative. They're an emergency response and they're a very good emergency response. But it's very difficult to look at them as an alternative. The adapt the level-based learning approach is basically when children do come back to school, don't start with the grade they are supposed to be in, or even just one grade below. Assess children's learning needs, what they are, because children might have gone through a lot of different trauma uh, during the past 2 years. Like we've spoken to them, and we realize that this sort of they have a lot of emotional needs that need to be addressed when they come back to school. All of these things need to happen, and then we need to sort of build on what children actually possess, what they have right now, and start from there. We can't have a policy level decision saying that okay, start from 2 grades below. That will not work. Also, we've already lost about 1 or 2 years of teaching, so we can't sort of cram it in 1 year. We'll have to look at 2 years of a continuum, looking at what you call mitigating the losses that children have suffered, and then going for further. So our this is something that we've seen across the state and other states also. Okay, okay, we need to finish the curriculum. We need to finish the curriculum. No, we don't need to finish the curriculum. We need to get children to whatever stage we can, considering all of the problems that we have faced, especially during the lockdown. And then we can try to get them to the grade appropriate levels that we had sort of decided at the national level or at the state level. But in these circumstances, it won't be possible to force children to achieve grade appropriate learnings. We have to look at it as a continuum and see, okay, within the 2 years, can we achieve what we had wanted to achieve in a year? Something like that. Uh, the uh, print environment in homes and communities is something that we thought should sort of function work as like home libraries, community libraries, that sort of thing, because exposure to print was a big issue. Exposure to reading material was a big issue that children faced. Even when the children are literate, they don't have any reading material, access to reading material. How bad is that? They don't even have signboards in front on their shops. They have these small shops without signboards, so even that is not there. So that level of print deficit environment exists, and we have to counter that by building community libraries. And so these are some of the recommendations that we've been trying to push as policy level decisions, either in terms of organizations or in terms of the government, and something that we're working towards. And the last one is obviously if there is another lockdown that happens, if there is another gap, we should focus on teachers, helping teacher learn how to cope with children when they do come back, train teachers in some of the competencies that they need when children come back. So these are the recommendations that we had built based on the study. All right, so I have finished the presentation and I really want people to discuss and talk about the paper so that the it becomes more relevant to everybody. So my presentation is over. I want to open the floor for questions and comments.
Thank you, sir. Now, if there are any questions, please raise your hands and our team members will recognize you.
Okay. Any questions, queries, clarifications, you want to understand exactly what the study was about. Or is it sort of clear from the presentation? I can also share the actual paper with the department team so that they can circulate the paper and you can read it and uh, go through it and then come get back to me with the other questions. Okay, so if there are no questions, I guess we can move on to the next agenda.
Okay, then that will be all. A heartfelt thank you to Pranjal for his very interesting lecture this morning. We at the conference team are extremely grateful. We will begin with the first panel for this morning, Contagion and Media, moderated by Professor Merinsami Raj at 10:45 a.m. Please stay with us.